Hello everybody on YouTube and the World Wide Web. I wanted to do a talk. I don't know how long it'll be, maybe a medium length talk about the topic of what is the meaning of life. And I just done a talk a couple days ago about basically, how do you make a very popular YouTube video, and why is it popular, and then kind of fitted that in together with aspects of marketing and aspects of human nature as well. So, this is again a kind of a continuation of that, or a building on of that. Essentially, it's been a fairly long time since I have done significant talks. I haven't been needed to do any of the substitute preaching at the Buddhist church lately, nor have I had any Udemy courses. I published 3 of those courses, one about addiction and mindfulness, one about everyday mindfulness, and then one about the cowboy and the global culture. And so kind of got away from doing that material, and it's been getting a little bit stale, I guess. So I encourage you all to to find those courses, find my books and websites and blogs online, and hope to get a lot of information about that. Subscribe and like down below, as of course, I'm sure you'll all do. So this particular talk, what is the meaning of life, is a very popular topic that a lot of people say, what does it all mean, and a lot of smart alecky kids, go into a class or whatever, and they ask the teacher, what is this class about? Sometimes the teacher will flippantly say, this is about the meaning of life, and a lot of people go to different religious backgrounds, different schools of religion and sects and churches and all of that, and essentially they're looking for the meaning in life, and so that basically is about it. And so for a lot of the the YouTube videos, what are people trying to get out of that? They're trying to get out the meaning of life. They're trying to get valuable, interesting things that will enrich their lives and make their life better, and make sense out of it all, essentially, is what it's about. Trying to get a little bit of light on my face here, a bit obscured. So, the reason for the talk, other than the reason I gave earlier, is essentially I just finished a self-retreat. As you may know, from the other materials that I have online, that I'm, an Acharya, Acharya James is kind of the moniker I've chosen for myself in the last 6 months or so. I've kind of chosen that to kind of identify myself as basically a master Buddhist teacher. I did do a short ordination, and then my name was Panyasya, or the Wisdom Lion. The Lion of Wisdom was my ordained name at the Birmingham Buddhist Vihara in the UK. But as you end that structured ordination, you're told explicitly, you're not to use the name anymore. And interestingly enough, just this past weekend at the the Buddhist church here in Jefferson City. There's this young guy who came in and said, "Oh, I have a Buddhist monk's robes. And, what should I do with that?" And he said that he bought them. He bought the robes, and so that also is a forbidden activity, to go out and buy your own robes. And so we kind of discussed that as well. Why did you buy these robes? And he said that he thought that that's what the Buddha did, and I'm pretty sure that is not historically correct to say that, because I believe originally he basically traded a beggar's clothes, for a beggar's clothes for his very ornate and costly royal wardrobe is the understanding. And then within the Theravada tradition, which is my tradition that I am involved in, I guess, or a part of. I don't know exactly. We're going to go into labeling later in the talk, but essentially, my training is in the Theravada, and the Theravada is what I find to be that which is most worthwhile and most authentic as far as Buddhism goes. So, within that tradition, you don't go off and ordain yourself once you have left monastery. You don't go around calling yourself by your ordained name and basically being a charlatan or kind of a fake monk through that process. And the robes are given to you, and that's part of that tradition of being a true monk is being essentially tied to the laity through your dependence on them for the requisites of existence. And so, that is kind of a thing that is a part of the Mahayana. I know specifically is that they will grow their own food and have farms, and they'll buy their own robes, for example. And so therefore, really in the Theravada way of looking at things, they're not really ordained, because they're kind of living self-sustained lives, which they're not really tied necessarily to the laity through this kind of dependence on them. So a lot of the Theravada do not look on the Mahayana monastics as actual monastics, but almost kind of a hybrid. But I didn't really intend to talk about that. I just kind of got waylaid a little bit. So essentially, the talk, I did a self-guided retreat during the Thanksgiving holiday, and it was probably about a day and a half that I did kind of by myself, and I did it at my house, which is another part of what the talk is about. It's very challenging for a lot of people to do their meditation at their house, because they have all these distractions, all the daily things that they do, their obligations and job and all of that is a real distraction. So that's a part of this particular retreat that I did. So I really did note that I struggled to concentrate. That was a really big part of it. And also dealing with what a lot of people really deal with, I think, is anxiety and worry and disappointment is also something that really came up in this particular retreat. As the days in the northern hemisphere become shorter and darker, a lot of people have this seasonally affected disorder to certain, or not to certain, but to varying levels, from person to person. There's a kind of a noticeable kind of a downswing in one's mood and such not, is the season changes into winter. So, this particular retreat, I noticed a lot of kind of, dealing with disappointment in people, particularly, and that's something I have noticed in myself, that I have awfully high expectations for people, because why is that? Well, I personally have always driven to be a productive, worthwhile person who's a valuable member of society. I think so highly of myself, but that's something I noticed, early on with the onset of puberty in myself. That it's like, man, everybody is a disappointing jerk. That's really the kind of the base condition that I noticed. Kind of beginning to grow up into a adult, is that wow, these people are really just terrible, useless people. Why is that? And so on the retreat, these same kind of feelings have developed. So thinking about again, doing the retreat at your house, it kind of augments some of these kind of natural tendencies. So I've moved to a different town about 3.5, 4 years ago, and I've become involved with the local Buddhist church, and got to know some of the people and all that, and so there's some interesting people, and basically I feel very disappointed in some of the people, because they're not very good Buddhist practitioners, and they're also not not very friendly towards me. So you have to kind of look at that. Why is that? And so essentially, one of the big points of the talk, again, what is the meaning of life? And essentially, your meaning in life is really derived from your own perspective. And if you go back to the Four Noble Truths, of course, it's based on your wanting of things, and that that particular noble truth of dukkha, the suffering. What does that mean? It's been kind of debated in recent years. Of it should be translated as stress rather than suffering. It should be translated as dissatisfactoriness, and so there's different kind of ways of interpreting that. So that in turn has an effect on your practice, and in turn has effect on your particular vision and experience of life. And so, my reflection on these people's behavior ultimately is a reflection of my own wants and desires. But that's only on one level. So you have these expectations, you have these desires, you have these wanted outcomes, and then you're very disappointed when you don't get what you want, which is a very organic, natural, healthy human psychological experience. But on the other hand, the fact is that there are many bad aspects of life which are not necessarily simply your experience. And so that's a part of where you can almost become too dogmatized into Buddhism, for example. So you say, why do people suck so much? And that's, well, you use the religious standpoint there, and it's essentially they suck because you suck. And there's that interesting quote from Dr. Wayne Dyer. Dr. Dyer is one of my big mentors and teachers, in that he borrowed, an even older story that these people moved, from one town to another town, and they said, well, how are things, in this town, and they have, different answers to that, and so essentially the moral of the story is that, whatever your views or reflections or, what your baseline kind of mentality is, that's going to be the one that you bring to every place that you go. Now that is partly true, but I think, honestly, as a spiritual teacher, I have to also, teach my followers that, in fact, there are some real negative, dukkha aspects of life that, even the best person cannot fix. But ultimately, the practice is about your relationship with these negative things. So, for example, the change of the weather. All the trees are going dormant, and it's becoming dark and rainy and bleak and all that. That is a real phenomenon. It's not all in your head, and your reaction, physiologically to that is also not purely your imagination or your reflection. So there are, real things that do interact with you. But ultimately, making sense of that as far as what your opinion is of that, do you have attachment to that, is really what the practice is about. So another quote from my favorite Wayne Dyer is that, one of the really interesting quotes that he did once is, this lady comes to him and says, my husband, who is, I forget all the adjectives and adverbs or whatever, but she's complaining about all the crazy, wacky, bad things that her husband does, and Dr. Dyer's answer to that is, who is really the wacky one if you expect your husband, who you already know is like this, he just does what you expect him to do. But who really is the wacky one if you expect him to do something other than what he's already kind of established as being his wackiness? So really, you are the wacky one if you're expecting someone who is wacky to not be wacky. so that's really kind of another real gem of spiritual wisdom, put in a kind of a pithy way, which is kind of part and parcel with this particular talk. Just need to check my notes here. So it has been a little bit more rambling than I had wished it to be, but essentially we do have that kind of that balance to do between, there is a reality, that is, negative and not as it should be and all that, and there's, your practice, which should be, pure and light and good and all that, but, we have to take that and reflect on that and absorb that through the human system, and so essentially, the practice is really limited by the human body and the human mind, and so, it really is about finding the meaning through the deepening of the practice. So, to kind of tie it, to what I was saying about, I'm disappointed in some of these people who occasionally come to the Buddhist church. Why don't they act friendlier towards me? Why don't they attend the Buddhist church more often? Also interestingly, I guess part of that is that I've noticed over the last year and a half, almost 2 years, that these particular individuals have attended even less. And I've not seen them attend the church, once in this past year and a half, whereas 3 years ago, it would seem, maybe every 3 months or so, you would see them there. And so I guess that, that's a part also of, there really is a, reality. You can't just stick your head in the sand and forget about things as a spiritual practitioner. So there are real, phenomena out there that have real effects on our practice, on our life experience. But ultimately, for any guru, any real practitioner, ultimately, your experience in life and your progress along your spiritual path is limited only by yourself, and the practice is always there. So that's another big part. What is life about? Well, your practice is there 24/7. You don't need to rely on a guru or a teacher. You don't need to rely on circumstances, because the practice is about understanding this human system that we have, that we then use to perceive the world and then interpret the world. But ultimately, as spiritual practitioners, our job is to continually become better, brighter, happier, wiser, kinder, and all of that. So may you all be happy, may you all be peaceful, may you all know wisdom, may you all become enlightened.